Good afternoon. Normally we don't have this size of a crowd, so this is the Agriculture Committee. So, unless it's not my birthday, so no. This isn't like college where if the instructor's 5 minutes late, you can go and get credit for it. So, well, actually, this is 4 or 5 minutes ahead of time. So this is a busy week this week, so hopefully you brought your computer. If not, you can look off your neighbor. We've got a few hearings coming up in just a little bit. We're going to do our briefing first and kind of on what's going on with the Kansas weather, as well as something that is, I think, very important. If your county does not have a Mesonet location, hopefully by the end of this presentation that you will put the pressure on somebody to, did you get one of those?
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
I was just thinking, I didn't remember the word.
Okay, yes. And then we'll also have the hearings on House Bill 2159 and 2047, which I know a lot of you are here, but I think hopefully everyone gains something from this. Joining us is Chip Redmond, who is the meteorologist or assistant meteorologist. I hear different types of things, what exactly you are, but you also head up the Kansas State Mesonet, and if you are in certain portions of the state of Kansas, you will hear a conversation that I have with him every week, and he tells me just to back off on specific days when it's going to rain. But Chip, thanks for being here, and this is kind of twofold to kind of whatever insights you want to share on just what has been kind of some goofiness in the weather, as well as kind of the role and what the Mesonet plays and whatever else you have for us. So welcome to committee.
That helps. So my name is Chip. I'm an assistant meteorologist, my official title at K-State. I'm the Kansas Mesonet manager, and so I work a lot with weather and climate data. I'll start out with just a kind of quick overview of the Mesonet and talk about what we do and things that we're working on. And I guess I could provide a couple tidbits on the oddities of Kansas weather, but we'd be here a long time. So first off, agriculture is a significant source and industry in the state of Kansas, and everything that supports agriculture is built around the weather and the climate, and that's how we're able to grow what we're able to grow here. So just a couple of quick thoughts of drought. First, drought is something that we deal with in the climate on a regular basis. It's expected, it's part of our climatology. It's kind of part of that pendulum where we're never actually at climate normal. We're either in drought or we're in flooding. We're rarely ever perfect. And so over the last 10 years, $320 billion have gone towards ag program relief in the state of Kansas through insurance payouts, through crop payouts. It's a ton of money. And then in addition to that, the Livestock Indemnity Program is one program we have specifically been the sole source for. And basically, if folks have cattle losses due to heat or cold, they come to us for the weather data. So all that data is coming from the Kansas Mesonet, and that was just 3.4 million. I pulled that number from 2019 because wasn't able to get the recent numbers. But that year alone, the Kansas Mesonet helped bring over $3 million back to the citizens in Kansas in those programs. And so the Kansas Mesonet fits a niche. We've got a big problem in Kansas that's really quiet right now, and that's climate data. Climate data in the state of Kansas is stuff we think about for 100-year-old data sources. We can look at change over time. It's just purely scientific. And we are losing those climate stations. We're losing them in the last 5 years, 6 years, we've lost about 30% of those climate sites. And so that's a big loss, and we're not getting any what we call climate reference stations back to replace these. So our data set is shrinking on a yearly basis, mainly because these are citizen science folks, and they would go out, they would take the weather observations every morning, and they're getting too old to do it, or there's no one there to take over for them when they decide to stop doing it. So that's kind of where the Kansas Mesonet fits in. There's other weather station networks across the state, such as KDOT. They have weather stations near roads, but that doesn't meet climate needs. That's near a road, so it's going to get warmer. It's going to usually have trees and obstructions, and highways often, or bridges obstruct them. The other main data source network across the state is part of the federal aviation weather stations. And so there's a lot of them in Kansas, but they're also aviation driven. And so they are not good climate sites because once again, you run into runways, you run into buildings, you even run into the occasional engine that overheats the sensor if the plane turns just right on the runway. So not good climate data. So what we have done is we started 30 years ago, 1985. We started the network of weather stations at K-State in the Department of Agronomy. These weather stations were located at the experiment fields that would support the research on those fields. Now, they're still the same ones out there. We still have 13 of those stations that have over 30 years of data, and that's what we consider a climate station in Kansas. It has to have 30 years worth of data. So since then, we have expanded, and mainly because there's a need for that weather data to support some of these relief programs, as well as to represent underrepresented locations in Kansas on weather and climate data. As we've continued to grow, we now don't just fit the agriculture need, we fit other necessities. And you can see there's a bunch of agencies that utilize our data in the state of Kansas on that paper there. We support a lot of folks. I'll highlight a few, but first I want to talk about the measurements and what we take. So to support agriculture in the state of Kansas, you need to have solar radiation, soil temperature, and soil moisture. No other networks in the state measure that information except the Kansas Mesonet. So we are the primary source for that data for both cropping reasons, and then that data is also used in other programs such as the fire danger that I'll talk about in a minute. We also measure your typical standard weather stuff. Wind, temperature, precipitation are all things that we really focused on that we need at a weather station. They deviate from the backyard stations, and that's probably what sets the Mesonet apart the most, is backyard stations are much more frequent than they were 10, 20 years ago thanks to technology, but they need people to maintain them. And not everyone's good at maintaining them, and they're usually not in a close location because they're usually close to their house, so their building obstructs the wind, and they're not really usable outside that location. So that's where the Kansas Mesonet fits in. We meet World Meteorological Organization siting requirements. So we have a whole list of things, and all our weather stations are standardized. So they all use the same equipment. They all have the same maintenance schedule, and they're representative. So you can compare one location in the state to another. So a couple of products that we do is evapotranspiration is a big one, and that's needed for irrigation and knowing how much water demand there is to irrigate. And so by having that data available, people are able to put it into something such as ks.gov, where they can look at what the estimated water usage is and look at a good irrigation schedule to help help sustain and reduce water needs and use. Another one that we do is inversion data. There was a big problem with soybeans a couple years ago with dicamba that came out, and it basically created volatilization of the spray. I'm a meteorologist, so I'll stay out of the science of that. But they were seeing drifting, and so they realized that the drifting problem was due to inversions across the state, and they happen everywhere. And so we now measure inversions on the mesonet, so producers can one-click go to see if there's an inversion in place to know if that's going to spread horizontally or if it'll mix vertically in the atmosphere. Another really heavy use product that we're working on, well, we have now, but we're also working on a new component of it that'll hopefully bring some forecast into it, is animal comfort. There was some big cattle losses in June. We had a big interest in the cattle comfort index in the southwest Kansas, and we were able to look at what the cattle were estimated to be feeling and what kind of danger levels they were in and for how long. And so we need solar radiation and wind speed and all those data sources to be able to develop that product and put it in producers' hands so you know when there is a real stress level. Hopefully, in the future with a forecast product, we can warn them in advance and be able to provide an additional value to that. But right now, they can get that current data in the historical data. So we take all that information and we store it internally. It's available to the public. Everyone can pull it up. You can pull it up on your your phone right now. The web page or the website is there on the bottom. I highly recommend it. It updates real time pretty much every 5 minutes. And so it has instant data and then that useful data source for historical information as well. Just a couple other things I want to point out for uses. I mentioned fire a couple of times. I'm pretty involved in the fire community, and I do predictive services stuff with the Kansas Forest Service. So if you follow them on Facebook, you see my face way too much in the fire season, and you're stuck with my corny jokes. But we need to estimate what fire danger is across the state. We've had a lot of different products that have been out there and we've tried and juggled, but one of the things we always came back to is the federal National Fire and Danger Rating System. Well, with the measurements that we take, we're able to calculate that now on the mesonet, and we provide that information. We're still testing it out. And it's not live at this moment. We're really, really close. Hopefully after this fire season, we can verify it for the final time, but we're getting the current what we call fire danger indices, and we can also look at the 7-day forecast out using the National Weather Service data. So there's a good relationship there with the Weather Service to make this happen. And so now folks can dial down in their county, get a fire danger estimation that is the same as what they're doing on the national level and what's done on all federal forests and lands across the United States. So that's a huge product, I think, that's going to really help fire personnel out and increase awareness in advance of a fire event. So where we sit right now is we've got 80 weather stations across the state. They are all standardized. They're maintained on a 6-month maintenance. Equipment is not cheap, and we've done really well, I think, budgeting and keeping that program and building that program out significantly. We have gotten funds from the federal government, and just to give you an idea what kind of budget we work off of, a weather station costs about $2,000 a year to maintain. And it's like I said, we've been pretty good on a limited budget at this point, which has been great, and I hope we can continue to move forward. But we get some money from the National Mesonet Program, which is a federal program through the National Weather Service, and that helps underwrite some of our funding, but that's meant to be a matching. And so right now we're getting around $140,000. Give or take a year, depending on how the federal government spends that money. But we're expected to find matching right now we get some money from research and extension, and we only get that's $40,000. We do a lot of fundraising. Most of our growth, just to say how much we've grown from just our ag customers, is through Homeland Security. They've been funding new weather stations for us, and that's the reason we've been growing over the last few years. So as we look towards the future, we're seeing that new stations are sexy. They're awesome to have out. And I really, if you don't have one in your area, talk to your producers, talk to your fire departments, even talk to your highway patrol and sheriff. They all use that data. We've had the Kansas Bureau of Investigations utilize weather data on a fairly frequent basis to look at in previous cases. But as we grow, we're going to obviously hit our limit, and we're kind of at that tipping point now where 80 weather stations is a lot. We got 7 more planned this year, and we're going to need additional staffing in the future, and that's where we're looking to grow as we move forward. It's to help beef up our infrastructure with technicians and programmers to help make this effort possible in the long term. We want to build 30-year climate data sets. We are trying and hopefully going to successfully continue good climate observing data in the state of Kansas to make agriculture more fruitful and to help us utilize our resources as we can. So I really appreciate your time today, Chairman and the committee, and I'll take any questions if you have them.
Very good. Any questions for Chip? Representative White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You spoke out at Meade, I believe, at a Farm Bureau several years ago, and you encouraged all of us farmers to get on the Mesonet webpage, and I'm trying to pull it up now. It's not coming in. But a lot of those old farmers came to me because I was the young guy and said, what am I doing wrong? I can't get this. And it's like, it was the blind leading the blind. Oh, it's popping up. Is there a way to simplify it? I don't know the correct terminology, but make it a little more farmer friendly, just like push here for precipitation, push here for, that's, I guess it's not a question, it's a suggestion.
Yeah, no, and it's a suggestion we've got. It's funny, we hear it's hard to use, or we also hear it's really, really simple to use. There's no middle ground in there. Because you hit that menu in the top left, and it'll take you to everything based upon your category of interest. But we are working right now to completely overhaul the website and to make it more location-driven for the folks that need it, and then also have the really cute maps that everyone wants to see when you got a nice cold front coming across the state. Or if you want to look at, that June event, for instance, where folks are looking at the cattle losses, and you can see that it was clearly targeted in southwest Kansas is where the heat and humidity was that day. So you're able to quickly locate where problem areas are. So we'll work on that. Thank you.
I think it's an age thing. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Does your group go to, yes. Do you guys go to schools and do any educational programs with this?
Yeah, we've asked if we have any school or education component to it, and we do. We've been working with several teachers. We've also worked with Kansas Corn and helped them with a module, actually more than one module. And we do talk to, I'm part of the STEAM program, the STEAM Fire program that goes and talks to students at the various schools that need or that are in more rural settings. So we are actively engaged with them. We're hoping to grow that, but once again, it comes down to a manpower thing.
Go ahead, Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, sir. Do you guys take the kids out to the field and show them these little stations and try to encourage maybe adopt a station for the kids or something?
Yeah, we think it'd be a great idea to have like a local 4-H chapter or an FFA group to go out and just cut the grass back and just get involved with that data. It's an idea we've had, but unfortunately we haven't been able to put the wheels on the ground yet.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Representative Roth.
Thank you, Chairman. Is this picture a picture of the station? Is it possible that this tower or anything could be used for anything else other than weather data collection?
Yeah, so that's a great question. That tower that's pictured there is our standard weather station that we have out. In most of the locations, we have some older ones that we're updating. There's a couple thoughts that we could do. We've thought about air quality is one of them, is to utilize them to measure air quality. We've also thought, and we're working with the biology department at K-State to look at setting up antennas to track birds on them. And so we cross department and even college lines quite a bit with various other projects, and we're always open to that. The biggest thing that we want to do is not compromise the data at that location. And so we, like with the folks tracking the bird, the MODIS program, we're testing it out right now to make sure their antennas don't mess up. That tower, for reference, is only about 30 feet tall, a telephone pole.
And then you mentioned the Homeland Security, they're funding towers.
Yeah, so they have a grant program that we can apply for by region. And so we've been applying for in the Northwest and South Central and Northeast regions. They've been supporting that each year that we propose.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Other questions? So, as you continue to grow, I'm assuming all this data, if you're out in the field, it's hard. And I know one day we talked, you were in Bird City on a Friday afternoon. I mean, and that's a couple sandwiches away from Manhattan. So, but when you're out in the field, it's difficult to get all this data, that we need. So, is that kind of where the greatest need is? I mean, or text, or just kind of a little bit of everything?
Yeah, we really need the technical support at this time. Just because 80 weather stations, it's a long drive, and we try to spread it out. We've got a local guy out in western Kansas who's been helping us out of Garden City, is taking the workload and kind of spreading that workload out so we don't have to drive from Manhattan and eat all those sandwiches is our goal.
Well, you never know. Representative Carlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if you were out in the droughted Southwest Kansas this week, next week, then June, and you could see the heat index was up, what would you do with that information? Would you put out a warning if you felt like, or do we have to go to the computer and see if you put out the warning? Tell me how that would work. Walk me through that, please.
Yeah, so we, at this current time, we don't do any warnings or anything like that. That's the National Weather Service, and we just observe the weather as our main goal. We are trying to provide these products that producers can look up, and hopefully they have a plan already in place for when there's various stresses. And this will provide them that data that they can utilize to look at their plan and see if they're in need to maybe water their cows or don't feed their cows today because they're going to create more heat, or change the time of the feed. And so to help make them make better decisions is our goal. And every producer is different and how they utilize that data. And so we would do some education on how they can access this information and perhaps build a plan, but we'll also turn towards folks at K-State that can help us and have more experience with the cattle to work cohesively to help these producers. Did I answer your question?
Well, I see what you do, but I guess it's up to an individual to check in to the system because there is no. So do you give the data to the National Weather Organization, or do they? How do they gather? How do they get what you have?
Yeah, through the National Mesonet program, we are required to allow the Weather Service to access our data at real time.
So they access it on a routine matter. Well, it's interesting because, those fires that happened out there and when all the cattle died last year, and, those were major problems. And I have a grandson with a little herd out there, and I said, what would you do? And he said, we've got a water truck. And I go, oh, geez. It's like nothing is enough. And so that's, I've been concerned since those 7,000 died and the however many we had in the fire a couple of years earlier. So it's a big issue for Kansas and for this region.
Yeah, so one of the things that were useful, I think the most, is real-time fire suppression, is that a lot of these mega fires, we call them in the state of Kansas, are all associated with a frontal passage. And so timing that cold front and seeing where it's at, they can pull up that map and they can see where the front and start to make educated decisions of, hey, it's already here, it's too late, or which they would probably already know. But but also that it's 2 counties over yet. We've got a little bit of time. How do we change our tactics and work with that?
Thank you for your presentation, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure. And, that cattle comfort index really came in this summer, early spring, whatever, late spring. And it's out there. And again, I'm sure just more money would get it out there more, but it works through the extension service. And I know you and I had a conversation. I was trying to figure out for sure on how much it did rain in Garden City. And I was trying to find much like Representative White, and he said, well, just go up to the top, click here, and there it is. And that's all it was. So it's simply a matter of adapting new technology. So one of these days I finally get rid of my Apple IIe, and I will, I think there's more computers than the floppy, it's hard to get a floppy drive anymore, but no. Before I let you go, if there's any other questions, I do want to talk just a little bit about weather, and I'm not putting you on the spot. I don't want to, we're not, we're going all over the world right now, but we are at kind of the end of La Nina. But now I'm hearing we may not start at El Nino, and I don't want to go into a lot of technical deals, but those are weather patterns. And one makes it dry here, and one doesn't necessarily make it wet, but doesn't make it quite so dry, especially in the western part of the state. That's technical language. But I mean, what can we expect? What are the models and the tools that you see? What can Kansas farmers, what can Kansas folks expect in 2023 here in the growing season?
Yeah, so a loaded question I'll try to answer in less than 30 minutes. Probably the biggest component is look around us now. We've already had drought improvement, especially the eastern half of the state. And the Northwest has also seen some pretty substantial improvement with snow. And the forecast is really optimistic short term. We've had some systems trend a little further north, and I think the next week is going to be great. What that's doing is storage for the upcoming growing season. And as we move forward, we're already above where we were last year at this time. And so I think we've made some pretty good progress. And as we continue into the summer, I think that progress is going to likely continue. And it won't be all in, or it's not going to be quick flip the switch. The last time we had 40% of the state in exceptional drought, it took 5 years to get rid of it. So it's not going to happen overnight, but definitely improvement, I think, as you get into spring. And looking at summer, if we were to really flip that switch to La Nina, we start seeing some things like wet and cold extremes in the summer, which are kind of odd, and definitely would break the trend. That's an extreme end of the spectrum, I think, but definitely some hope of moderating conditions as we get into summer. So I think 2023 is to a positive.
Let's hope so. Recharge is another word we like to use in western Kansas. So, Representative Minix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess just to kind of follow up on the discussion here, these guys do a really good job of gathering the data and putting it on a website. They don't call the feed yards and tell them we got a problem here. It's up to them. It's the same thing with your high school football team or your baseball team. If there's lightning in the area, these guys are aware of it. And they can't tell everybody, but they get the information out there so that we can make wise decisions on what we need to do with our outdoor activities, basically. And I applaud the efforts and information that you do give to us. Thank you.
Very good. Last call for questions. Seeing none. All right, Chip, thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Do you want to stick around for some riveting testimony on some that the rest of this group is here for? But thanks for being here. Okay. With that, we will move on. We have a couple of hearings. We'll open the hearing now on House Bill 2159. And with that, we'll call on Kyle Hamilton for a briefing on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Under current law, the Kansas Department of Health and Environment has the authority to regulate salt solution mining, underground storage of natural gas embedded salt, and liquid petroleum gas and hydrocarbons. Starting on page 2 of the bill, line 35, you'll see that some language that required the Secretary to adopt rules and regulations by 2003 has been stricken. That's just part of technical cleanup. On page 3, line 7, the Secretary of Health and Environment would be required to adopt rules and regulations and establish fees for underground injection control Class 1 wells. Facilities that are already subject to fees under subsection D would have the new fees established under the new language reduced. Additionally, the Secretary would be required to adopt rules and regulations and fees for Class 5 wells. Monies collected from these new fees would be credited to the Subsurface Hydrocarbon Storage Fund, which is used to cover the costs of regulating underground injection control wells. And then the rest of the bill kind of pivots to a slightly different topic. Under current law, fees collected from water well contractors and the certification of operators of water supply systems and wastewater treatment facilities are credited to the state general fund. Sections 2 through 4 of the bill would amend the relevant statutes to have such fees credited to the Water Program Management Fund instead. Expenditures from the fund are restricted to the purposes listed on page 4 of the bill, starting on line 7. House Bill 2159 would become effective upon publication in the statute book. With that, I'd be happy to stand for any preliminary questions.
Questions for Kyle? Seeing none. Representative Minix.
Kyle, the process of putting this into the state general fund has been changed over the years in other issues similar to this and gone directly to a fund that's managed by KDHE. So this is just kind of a cleanup on one of these that's similar to the others. Is that correct?
I don't have that additional context, but I'm happy to assume that's true.
Maybe the conferees will
Yeah, I'm sure the following-
talk about that later then. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Kyle. All right. Up first, the proponents, Tom Stiles, KDHE. Thanks for coming to committee, Mr. Stiles. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman Rajas, members of the committee. I'm Tom Stiles. I'm Director of the Bureau of Water at KDHE. The agency stands in support of this legislation. It's one that we have floated in front of the legislature a few times in the past, 2019, 2020, and in the most recent history. The bill does, as Kyle laid out, it does really 5 things. It amends the existing statute to allow the Secretary to establish fees for our Class 1 and Class 5 underground injection control wells. The Underground Injection Control Program lies within the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act, and it governs the protection of our water supplies by safely managing the disposal of waste. Class 1 wells dispose of various waste, hazardous waste, or brines to deep injection, essentially removing that to extinction. That water is removed from the hydrologic cycle. Typically, that has been disposed of within the Arbuckle, which has been a matter of another subject relative to that. Class 5 wells are more shallow. The Wichita Aquifer Storage and Recharge Project is an example of a Class 5 operation. There's a few others around, such as Boeing Spirit's disposal there. But essentially, it's disposal that's done in shallow aquifers with a chance that it will resume as part of the hydrologic cycle down the road. We also manage Class 3 wells. Those are salt solution mining, the creation of the caverns in the Hutchinson salt member, but also just salt solution mining by companies such as Morton and Cargill. those facilities already have a fee established on them. This legislation would have a fee placed on the other two classes that KDHE regulates under the Underground Injection Control Program. The legislation puts caps or ceilings on the fees that we would place on the wells associated with the Class 1, Class 5, and it directs that the new fees be discounted for those facilities that already are paying into both the salt solution mining program, but also the underground hydrocarbon storage program, of which there are about 22 operators relative to that. 4 of them also do underground injection control Class 1s. 4 of them also do UIC Class 3 type of wells. So they've already been paying in historically there. These new fees would be essentially not overburdening them with a brand new fee, but give them some level of discounting. The fourth thing this legislation does, it directs the revenue generated by these fees into our underground hydrocarbon storage fee fund. And in a moment, I'll express why this legislation is motivated a lot by the condition of that fund. And then finally, as Kyle laid out, there are other fees that are levied on water and wastewater certified operators, and on our water well licensed water well drillers and their rigs. That has always gone to the state general fund. This legislation and those sections would redirect those monies generated over into the water program fee fund within the Bureau of Water. The motivation for the legislation is really threefold. First off, it just expands the opportunity to have more resources available to take on the growing number of challenges associated with the programs. It stabilizes the funding and makes us less reliant on both the overall state general fund, but also the federal grants that come down to implement the federal programs. Most importantly, it creates a sense of equity among the facilities that have historically funded the underground hydrocarbon storage fund. That fund basically has been used to support the management and administration of both the Class 1 and Class 5 operations. And so this legislation would begin to diminish that subsidization by the UHS operators for the benefit and direction on the other UIC Class 1 to Class 5, Class 1 operations. We've vetted this legislation with a variety of the interests that lie out there. And for the most part, we've had generated a high degree of support for the legislation, albeit with caveats. The support and the supporters that are looking on to this say the fees, have always expressed that fees need to be directed toward the regular programs for which they have been levied. Hence the ask within the legislation to redirect certified operators and water well drillers away from state general fund and into the program itself within the Bureau of Water. The fees need to be capped so that there isn't an escalation on our part in raising fees on a routine basis. The operations already paying into those fee funds, such as salt solution mining or the Class 3 wells, should get relief from any additional fees. The increases in fee support should be tied into expectations of increased services and benefits, such as reviewing permits and plans and technical assistance. And then when the time comes to impose fees, that they've done gradually to allow for the operators to budget and plan accordingly and not face sticker shock relative to that. Under the Certified Operator Program, the fees have averaged about $47,000 over the last 3 years going into the State General Fund. The water well licensing and for the drillers has averaged over the last 3 years about $55,000. At the caps, the new fees for Class 1 and Class 5 would probably raise about $205,000 annually. And again, that reflects both the levying the fees at the caps expressed within the legislation, but also accounts for about 25% discount for those operators that have already been paying into the existing geology fee funds that we currently manage. I'll stop there for the sake of brevity, but I'll reiterate that KDHE stands in support of this legislation. It does provide a greater sense of equity among our fee payers and operators, and also provides us a base of support for funding the programs as we enter a new era of operations and incentives that are looking toward utilizing our salt resources as well as disposing of the associated waste that come along with that. Mr. Chair, thank you. I'll take any questions.
For Mr. Stiles? The way I understand it then is that all these fees collected, some right now are going into KDHE, but all these will be going into KDHE, is that right? Directly back to the appropriate programs, correct?
Correct. Right now, the legislation is looking at three funds. It creates the fees for the Class 1 and Class 5, brand new, never done. That would direct it toward our underground hydrocarbon storage fee fund, as our UHS fees currently do. The other two are the certified operator fees and the water well driller fees. Those have always gone to the state general fund. Our ask through the legislation is to direct those back into the Bureau of Water funds.
Over the years, you know how much has been swept out years ago? Do you recall just a rough guesstimate when we were doing that?
Not so much sweat. It's always been a diminishment of our state general fund support. Right now, we probably still are supported by about $110,000 of state general fund. That has come down probably at least threefold. But that when instead of a fee sweep, we have just relinquished more and more state general fund support for our programs, which is actually a position and policy that we support. The more we can wean ourselves off of SGF, the better off our operations stand.
Okay. Other questions? And you say these fees have not been raised since 1975.
For the certified operators,
okay.
That's certainly the case.
Okay.
And really the water well drillers have been frozen in time as well for multiple decades.
Right. And then with the cap being put on, how quickly am I to assume then, if this legislation is passed, are we going to play catch up? Or are you going to try to raise the fees right away? I know your testimony said I don't put words in your mouth, but it seemed like what it said was it not quickly, but if this passes, will you go ahead and need to start raising the fees right away?
Well, we'll embark on the process to start doing that, and for the sake of equity for the people that have already been paying into that subsidize the other water well drillers and the drilling program and our UIC programs there. The regulatory process in and of itself takes quite a bit of time anymore, so there'll be fair warning to do that, and we've agreed with everybody that we will probably stair-step our fees over time, and I think that'll just be a conversation as we start drafting those regulations to, for the sake of transparency, indicate just what we think is, in the first cut, what would be a necessary level of fees to be generated through this legislation.
Very good. Seeing no other questions, thank you for...
My pleasure. Thank you.
For appearing before the committee. Also up next will be Michael Gillespie from One Oak. Mr. Gillespie, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'll try to be brief. Mr. Stiles did a good job of explaining what the program is, and so I'll just kind of piece in why industry would care and why we support the change of actually increasing or having fees for underground injection control. So One Oak is a natural gas and natural gas liquids pipeline company. We operate in 18 states with substantial assets in Kansas. We have about 40,000 miles of pipe across 18 states and about 7,500 miles of pipe in Kansas. And as part of our natural gas liquids business, we utilize underground injection. So we use underground injection for two ways. One is the process water part of our heating and cooling of our units, more or less our chemistry set, to make purity propane, butane, natural gasoline. And we also use it for our salt water or for our brine disposal when we use our underground hydrocarbon storage. And as Mr. Stiles alluded to, because we operate underground hydrocarbon storage, we pay fees for that purpose. So we pay a fee for every underground storage well we have, but also for underground storage facilities in general. So One Oak pays about $200,000 annually for the UHS program. That then part of that money goes over to the UIC program, which KDH&E uses to permit, test, and monitor our underground injection wells. And so it kind of pairs these two things together. We bring industry involved, but our main reason for support of this legislation is to make sure that the UIC program is less subsidized or no longer subsidized by the underground hydrocarbon storage fee fund. So if we can have a standalone fee that pays for those needs at KDH&E for the permitting and regulating of our underground injection control programs, we think that helps keep the money in the place where it needs to be because we believe in it being regulated and our industry being regulated, but also making sure that it's paying for its need rather than being just a big old bucket of money that gets paid for by us. There are only 4 main operators of underground storage in Kansas that pay the brunt of the fees, and there are 22-ish underground injection control class 1 operators. So imagine 4 companies paying for the 22-ish that use that the agency for those permitting. So we believe this helps kind of split it back to where it needs to be. And it really helps remove the subsidization. In 2020, we had the bill passed out of the Senate over to the House. The House had, I believe, passed it out of House Ag, and COVID happened. And the legislature said, we're just going to do the main things we need to get done, and this did not make the chopping block of getting done. So the caps were put in place in the Senate Ag Committee by Senator Kirshen and Senator Francisco. They believe that having a cap that the KDH&E could not immediately raise fees, and I believe they have agreed that it would not just start at that cap and start collecting, but gradually stair-step it up. We think that's great, but also having the regulatory certainty of our operations costs of what we pay to a regulator, it would be able to budget and forecast for every year. And so we stand in support of this. We believe it's good legislation and be happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Gillespie? Just talk about the process then. You think this is then probably the most fair way, and then this way with that revenue source going back into KDHE rather than, would be better than trying to hope for some sort of appropriation then from the State General Fund?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that this would be a good way to make sure the Class 1 regulation money goes, or fee funds go to the Class 1, and underground hydrocarbon storage stays with underground hydrocarbon storage, because that is also another program KDH&E runs and make sure it's permitted, regulated well. And so we feel that those two things being done separately, but also this avenue, making sure that there are caps in place to make sure that industry is not hit by a new spike in operation costs, but can do the job we need to.
All right. Seeing no other questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Did anybody say how much it's going to be for a year for somebody to pay into this?
Oh. Mr. Stiles, I have another question here, if you don't mind. I know I operate a little different than some committees. You want me to ask it, or do you want to ask it to Representative Carlin?
Well, thank you. I was looking at the page 3, the rates, And if a company, it's companies that are going to pay this. So what could one company expect to pay into this in a year? I don't understand your numbers because I'm not familiar with the way they work.
Well, as Mr. Gillespie indicated, there are 22 operators. The biggest ones probably are those that have a joint underground hydrocarbon storage operation along with their UIC operations there. So for any of those four, we're talking in the neighborhood of $20,000 to $25,000 a year generated by the fees imposed on their UIC Class 1 operations.
And everybody thinks this is the way it should be. I mean, you don't have opposition to this. Everybody agrees this needs to be.
We have conditioned support as long as things are capped, things are gradual, and that the program receives the money, responds to the money with good service.
And I liked what you said about the increases tied to increased services. That would be appropriate. Okay, I just needed I couldn't get a handle on the cost. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Stiles. Anyone else here as a proponent? Seeing none, anyone here to testify as a opponent? Seeing none, anyone here to testify as neutral? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on House Bill 2159. Now on to House Bill 2047 and Pollution Control Revolving Fund. And Kyle Hamilton once again will have an explainer for us. Kyle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Under current law, the Kansas Department of Health and Environment uses funds from the Kansas Water Pollution Control Revolving Fund to finance wastewater treatment projects across the state through loans. Repayment of such loans must begin not later than 1 year after completion of the project and must be paid in full within 20 years thereafter. House Bill 2047 would change the repayment timeline by requiring that on and after July 1, 2023, agreements for loans shall provide that such loans shall be repaid in full not later than 30 years thereafter. House Bill 2047 would become effective upon publication in the statute book. And with that, I'd be happy to take any preliminary questions.
Any questions for Kyle? Seeing none, thank you. Up first is a proponent, that is. My word, long day already. First up, Nick Hernandez, the city manager, Dodge City. Mr. Hernandez, thanks for coming to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee, for allowing me to come before you and testify in support of this proposed amendment from 20 years to 30 years on the Water Pollution Control Revolving Fund. As some of you may know, Dodge City will be home to a new dairy processing facility owned and operated by the Hillmar Cheese Company. The facility is scheduled to be operational in late 2024, and the city is going to be responsible for providing water and wastewater solutions and services to the facility. The facility itself will produce about 1.5 million gallons of additional wastewater per day to the city. And we're currently developing plans to expand the treatment capacity to handle the additional waste stream. With the passage of 2047, the city will be able to finance the additional infrastructure needs more affordably by adding 10 additional years to the amortization period. Currently, the city manages approximately 3 billion gallons of municipal wastewater and wastewater from National Beef Processing Facility with our system of aerobic and anaerobic digesters and facultative lagoons. The lagoons not only serve as a part of our treatment system, but also serve as irrigation storage for a large complex of over 3,000 acres of irrigated cropland that's adjacent to the wastewater facility. And just as a side note, the city of Dodge City, we actually recycle almost 100% of our wastewater currently as a city. The city also produces biogas from the wastewater at the amount of about 500 million BTUs a year, which is about enough to power 5,500 homes on an annual basis. The city is currently also evaluating a plan to utilize the Hillmar wastewater along with some of our excess waste stream from the municipal flows to develop a managed aquifer recharge project. This project will return about 4 million gallons per day or 1.5 billion gallons per year of wastewater to the Arkansas River and utilize... Try it again. And utilize the dry riverbed and alluvium to further cleanse the water and recharge the aquifer in the vicinity of many of the city's public water supply wells. For those that are familiar with ag, 1.5 billion gallons a year is about 4,500 acre feet of water. So it's quite a bit of water that we're going to be trying to put back into our city wells. And one of the things is, one of the considerations of this project is we're trying to make it scalable. So that way communities of different sizes can potentially utilize the same technologies and protocols that we are looking into. Also, a little bit later on, KMU and Josh Foddy, they'll be recommending a proposed amendment to House Bill 2047 to allow Kansas public water suppliers to certify water system replacements in addition to extensions. And I just want you to know Dodge City has qualified engineering staff to provide the required certifications of the amendment. So basically, I just want to be here to show our support and recommend the simple amendment to KSA 653326 to allow Dodge City and other communities to implement wastewater treatment solutions with more affordability to its users and extending the amortization period by a decade. And so I stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hernandez. Questions? You can tell this is the first day of bill hearing, so everybody's still trying to figure it out. Okay, very good. Thank you. Up next, William Carr, KDHE. Mr. Carr, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is William Carr. I'm the Assistant Director for the Bureau of Water at Kansas Department of Health and Environment. The Bureau of Water oversees the Kansas Public Water Supply Loan Fund, which we provide financing for wastewater and stormwater infrastructure projects. Expanding the loan repayment term from the current 20 years to 30 years will provide some flexibility to municipalities that borrow our funds when it comes to planning and establishing user rates to repay those loans. Although you keep in mind that extending from a 20-year loan to a 30-year loan, the overall interest cost of that loan is actually going to increase. However, the annual debt service cost is going to be significantly lower than a 20-year annual debt service cost. So that provides that flexibility to reduce the rates that you're charging your customers. I will also note that extending the maximum loan amount to, or loan repayment period to 30 years doesn't mean that everyone would get a 30-year loan. It's still voluntary. A municipality can choose that 20-year loan to save on those interest costs compared to the 30-year loan. So because of the flexibility that this amendment to the statute would provide to municipalities, and that it somewhat mirrors our abilities in the drinking water loan program to do extended loan terms, KDHE supports this bill. That's the end of my prepared remarks. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. In your experience, have there been municipalities who come to you and say, if it was 30 years, we could do this? I mean, do you see a number of projects now happening and trying to go for that 30 years?
Yes. Over the last, I'd say at least 3 years, we've gotten lots and lots of questions of larger infrastructure projects that it just makes sense that for the municipalities to spread that over 30 years. I will add that the project itself has got to last that long. So that's an analysis that we'll have to ensure is true before we award those 30-year loans. We can't do a 30-year loan for infrastructure. It's only last 20 years. But yes, we have gotten lots of questions about that.
Okay, Representative Minix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You partially answered my question right there at the end. 30-year loans on a water system, wastewater or clean drinking water. What's kind of a normal age for the municipal water systems out there in the state of Kansas at this time?
For wastewater systems, I think it depends on whether you're talking about treatment plant systems or just collection systems, the pipe that collects all the stuff and takes it to either lagoon treatment or whatnot. I'd say those collection systems are just like on the drinking water side. Those collection systems and distribution systems are around 100 years old.
Okay. I was just a little bit worried about bonding something that has a shorter lifespan than what the bond is and creating problems for people in the future. But you're telling me the longevity is there on these types of projects. Yes. Even the city of Dodge City might start with this program and work their way into it. In 5 years, technology changed somewhat, and they can kind of roll into some newer technologies that go along, I'm guessing.
Yes, I will add for even like mechanical treatment plant projects, have buildings and equipments. Usually, the equipment's not going to last 30 years. You're going to have some kind of rehab sometime within that period. But the building itself, the structure will last that long. And so, and that's a lot of the treatment plants now are 50, 100 years old because the building's just that old and they replace the treatment and equipment. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Schleien-Siepen. Oh, you don't? Okay. Okay. I had it wrote down. I'm prepared. I'm prepared. All right. Okay. Very good. Other questions? I think that's probably it. What about there's a lot of things that we still don't know that came from the federal government through the IRA, the interest or the
Interest Reduction Act.
In my mind, Inflation Reduction Act. There it is.
One of those IRAs.
I think it's more the Income Reduction Act. But anyway. Are there going to be things like this for municipalities that could help? And I guess I'm doing a stretch here from a conservation or from another standpoint of helping some of these communities. Have you heard any inkling of that rather than simply getting a loan, would there be
other federal grant programs? Yeah. I don't know of any new federal grant programs. No.
Okay. Other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're fine. Up next, Josh Spotty with Kansas Municipal Utilities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here. I won't go over the particulars of 2047. That's pretty straightforward. I would encourage, if, Mr. Chairman, it is the will of this committee to work the bill, which I hope that it would, that you would move that along. It's very straightforward. The only thing that I would also add, when Dodge City, which was the initial city that came forward and said, hey, could we explore doing this? The municipal utility said, hey, that would be great for Dodge City, but that would actually be great for a lot of other communities that would be interested in this. And then as we thought a little more about opening some of these questions back again under the umbrella of trying to make things a little simpler for everyone, we thought of another addition that we could include in this. We did include that in the Senate version of this legislation that we have introduced. We didn't on here, but I would encourage you, if you were to work it, I'm going to walk you through a bit of the proposed amendment that we would suggest if you were to work this. It as well is also simple. Many of you that have been around this process us a long time know that it's very rare to put two simple concepts together, but these are both pretty simple ones. The one that we would propose would be to simply allow, there are some communities, as Mr. Hernandez noted, that have qualified professional engineers on staff. They are currently under current law allowed to approve their own extensions of distribution systems. We would also request that they be allowed to approve their own replacement of segments of distribution systems, and the reviser here on this committee has that language should you choose to work this bill. Again, I don't want to speak for the Department of Health and Environment, and it would be the will of the chair if he would pass them back up here, but I believe they're fine with that change as well, mostly because it's difficult for all of us, the state or at the local level, to have engineers right now. These plans have to be approved, and for those cities that do have qualified engineers on staff, and it's maybe roughly a dozen of them. Dodge City is one of them that has qualified engineers on staff. They could certify these extensions right now, or we would be recommending also replacement of segments themselves, which just moves the process along a little faster. So very supportive of extending the 20 years to 30, the underlying 2047, and should you choose to work the bill, we would also request that you would be interested in including that language as well so we could move it along. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions for Josh? I do have one. Okay. So with this proposed amendment and with the lack of PEs, can we do some on this particular situation? We do some sharing to where I'm not sure exactly where you kind of where I'm going with this, because I would hate to hold up progress simply because and not to give Mr. Streeter a lot of more work to do, but if we are that condition critical, if you will, that if that's a possibility, I don't know.
The question would be like, let's say if your city has an engineering, professional engineer on staff, and then the neighboring city does not, why can't they do that? I actually don't believe they can, and if I may be allowed, Mr. Chairman, KDHE is probably the appropriate entity to answer that question.
Mr. Carr, who's the right one that could give us some insight? Just kind of thinking out loud here, trying to find solutions.
Right. No, that the way we currently see that program, that wouldn't allow. It's a certification program. We're actually certifying municipalities themselves, and we would not allow them to certify some other municipalities' plans and specs. So.
Sure. Well, and I guess not necessarily that, but just being able to utilize the service. I mean, not to circumvent the process. And do you understand what I'm trying to get at?
Not exactly.
Okay.
I'm sorry, sir.
Well, I'm just thinking of if we do have a shortage of engineers, if these projects move forward, to utilize their expertise, they still have to go through that process of getting certified. But I think you answered the question, though, because it's the municipality itself as much as
it's the KDHE in the statute. It's the KDHE has authority to certify municipalities through this program. And incidentally, we have not passed those regulations yet. We're still working on those, so that program doesn't exist yet today.
Mm-hmm. How long have you been working on those?
Probably about 3 years.
Yeah, that's what I thought. All right. Representative Minix.
Okay. Question: how many engineers are you short? And if a municipality brought an application to you for this, how long would it take to get an answer?
Well, as I mentioned, the program, the certification process isn't developed yet. So I don't know that I can answer that question. If a municipality came to us, say, we want to certify for this program, we don't have all the application parts in place yet.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Carr, for second bite at that. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we also have written testimony from Wendy Stark from the League of Kansas Municipalities. Anyone else here to testify as a proponent for House Bill 2047? Seeing none, anyone here to testify as an opponent of House Bill 2047? Seeing none, anyone here to testify neutral and for 2047. Seeing none, I will close the hearing on House Bill 2047. That's what I have on the agenda today. Thank you for bringing your computers. We will also, for tomorrow, with the testimony, actually for our House Bill 2160 and 2332. We will also have copies of the bills and briefings as well in the emails that will be sent out. So this is the first day. It's kind of like, back to school 6 weeks later. But anyway. And then possibly tomorrow we will work these two bills. We'll see how our time is. We do have a couple of briefings. Actually, just one, correct. We have the Kansas Healthy Food Initiative, kind of an update of what we did last year for those of you that were on the committee as holdovers. Any other announcements for the committee? Seeing none, we are adjourned until tomorrow at 3:30.